I'm Reverend Roger Manassian. My dream began in 1992 for Hope Now for Youth. It was a bad year here in Fresno. We had 87 homicides, on our way to 97 homicides for a city of 375,000 people. We had 14,400 cars stolen, which put us second to Newark, New Jersey in per capita car thefts in the United States. In fact, most of us, if we went to church or went to the store, were always worried about, when we got back to the parking lot, if our car would be there. A group of pastors was called together by our, what I call the Bishop of Fresno, G.L. Johnson, to pray about the city and pray for ourselves. And this was March of 1992, and we spent 3.5 days in the mountains getting to know each other, worshiping, praying, thinking, sharing together for our city, for our churches, asking what would God have us do in response to what we were seeing in our city. A number of things came out of that, and that was like the first part of my wake-up call. At that point, I'd been pastoring middle class and above churches for the last 22 years, and the second part of my wake-up call was about a month later. End of April, early May was the Los Angeles rebellion, the Los Angeles Rodney King riots. And I remember watching that on television. We were worried about things rumbling here in Fresno at the same time. And as I watched it on television, it was like God put a question in my mind. And the question was, what kind of despair makes people set fire to their own neighborhoods? I had never experienced such hopelessness, but obviously there were thousands of people who did. And as I watched them running the streets, I thought to myself, don't they have jobs? What's the problem here? And as I began thinking that thought, God began putting in my heart the idea, you better go find out why people do this, why people have this kind of hopelessness. I had a chance through a friend to meet 3 gang members. As I sat down and listened to these young men's stories, I was struck by the hopelessness and helplessness of their lives. One particular young man's story was just very touching, and he talked about the fact that his father was in jail and on drug charges. He never knew his mother because she was a heroin addict, and he did have a stepmother at some point, but she had been raped and murdered by his uncle, who was in state prison. And as I drove away from that experience, I began to pray for these young men. And as I began to pray for these young men, I began to cry. And I don't cry easily, so when I start crying, I start asking myself some big questions. Why am I crying? Certainly the stories I heard were sad enough, but that's not why I was crying. I was crying because I was angry. I was furious. I was saying to myself, what decided that my soul should enter this world in a family of 2 people who loved each other, who stayed together, who provided for my needs, who gave me hope and a future, and though they never went to college, made sure I did, and even on to graduate school. And what decided that these young men's souls entered the families that they had to enter, and some of their families I would describe just as a hellhole. And I said, that's not fair. Somebody's got to do something about it. And out of that conviction and a time of prayer, and also the scriptures, slowly I came to the idea that I guess I could do something about it. At this very time when I'm meeting these gang members, I'm going through Isaiah 61. And I get to these verses and I begin applying them to gang members. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Fresno, my thought was, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. For they will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. Over a 2-week period of time, as God woke me up at night, these verses were running through my head. And I began to realize that God wanted these verses to be applied to these young, hopeless men on the streets and their families. And so out of that, I tendered my resignation as pastor of a church, local church here, and decided to start a nonprofit called Hope Now for Youth to reach out to young men and to provide a caring relationship to them and also a job opportunity so they could earn clean money and not be stuck in the gangs earning dirty money from drug sales or stealing. In fact, our motto became 2 steps and you're up. A caring relationship plus a job lifts a gang member from the streets into the American mainstream. And I'm convinced, even as we now are in 4 California cities with this model, that this model could be used in 1,000 cities of America, working 10,000 streets of America to reach 1 million gang members who need help, who need hope.
Hi, I'm Skin Mead, and I drew from these real-life events to create the characters in the screenplay Finding Hope Now. It really is an amazing story. You can become involved in 3 ways. Number 1, pray. Number 2, send this website to all of your friends. And number 3, become a financial partner. Help us make this movie.